y'all, and welcome back to My Creative Life with Kel Sweetie, where we read books, where we make art, where we thrift, and essentially do anything our creative hearts desire. Today, we're wrapping up August with all of the books that I read and DNF'd. It was a really rough month. So let's get into it. So this month was really rough, and I had a feeling that it was bound to happen, that I was gonna hit a reading slump just because of how good July and June were for me. I felt it coming. The reading slump was on the horizon, and it came. It really did. I had thrifted 3 books from Goodwill. So I think it was in July. Tried to read all 3 books, even picked up some books. They all just weren't good to me, but it's rough. I DNF'd 2 books. I almost DNF'd 3. I think I finished one of them just to spite the slump. Good news is I think I pulled myself out of a reading slump, surprisingly, with some book talk books that have been really popular. I'm gonna have a whole other video basically saying whether or not they were worth the hype in further detail. You will find out whether or not they were essentially worth the hype in this book with my review. But I really want to go in deeper detail because these 2 books are extremely out of the genre that I usually read in, and I kind of want to talk more about it. But in the essence of not having a long video, we're gonna save another video for that. So today I'm gonna be talking about the 5 books I tried to read. I think it's 5, we'll see. And the 2 of those that I basically DNF'd, the 2 of those that were 5 stars, and the one that I basically finished to spite a slump. And at the end, we're gonna briefly talk about what I'm looking forward to reading during September and getting ready for spooky season. I mean, for me, when it comes to reading books, it's spooky season all year. I love the thriller, I love the horror, I love the drama. Ain't much more romance over here, but it's nice when everyone else is reading spooky books, so you're not the weird one who's talking about a murder every 5 pages. But we'll get into that at the end of the video. So let's get into the first book that I tried to read this month, and that was The Book Eaters by Sunny Dean, or Sunyi Dean. I haven't been clarified on how to pronounce their name. I was so excited for this book. I've been wanting to read it for a while now. The main plot of it is essentially they're a group of people, and how they sustain life is through eating books. They take on the knowledge of the books that they read, and that's just how they end up surviving. That's what they eat. They eat books. Well, one kid is born, and essentially he needs to eat people's brains. He eats people's brains, he gets their knowledge, their personalities, but that's how he sustains, is eating other people's knowledge as opposed to knowledge in pages. Amazing plot, right? That sounds great. That sounds like, ooh, we're getting ready for spooky season. Let it be fall already. This book was not that. I think accents and whether or not, that's the thing with audiobook. If the accent's off, if the person who's narrating kind of sounds off or isn't doing the voices very well, it can make or break the book. Sometimes I've read books where I'm like, wow, that narration was so amazing. I sped through that book. One of my favorite books that I finished last year, American Gods, which is right behind me, was amazing. And the only reason I feel like I sped through it in the matter of a week is because it had a full cast, and that cast was amazing for it. So I want to try reading this again physically. I just feel like maybe the audiobook let it down because it's hard for me to truly believe that with a plot like that, this book got DNF'd. The mother of the child, it's very Firestarter type relationship where a parent is essentially trying to protect their child because they're kind of a menace to society or a monster. She is a book eater herself, and she has to bring people to her child to make him like have sustenance. So she is kind of predatory. It's also a queer story wrapped in this, and even that couldn't save it. She kind of, from what I could tell after, you know, kind of getting only 15% into the book, she falls in love with somebody who understands who her child is and what he kind of is. It just was very literary, and it got wordy. It wasn't capturing my attention. I was actually disappointed. I would have to hear certain parts just because I wasn't getting the story and I was kind of like not paying attention. It just wasn't exciting. I have heard though, and I kind of didn't want to believe it, that this book didn't get very high ratings. I didn't read a lot of reviews. I don't like to read a lot of reviews per se that are in depth because I don't want to ruin the book. That was my first DNF, and we started off pretty rough, especially considering at the end of last month I had finished The Woman in the Window, and the ending, while it was amazing, everything before that was pretty much like I could have figured out the ending and you're busy drinking wine. So again, I want to blame it on the slump, but I want to blame it on the audiobook. But it might be just at the end of the day that this had a very promising plot, and it didn't meet where it was supposed to go. I DNF'd it. No rate for it, to be honest. I'm gonna try it again later on, maybe this year when I'm off from work and have some time so I can physically read it. I'm hoping that maybe having my own narration will just help the book along, and that I can just blame it on the narrator. The second book that I ended up DNFing was one of the books that I got from the thrift store, and I'm trying to thrift more of my books. Although I read audiobooks, I love to still get the physical books. One, because I like to sometimes read the physical along with the narration. I just feel like over the last year I started listening to audiobook, and I realized that I was getting a lot more out of the story. So with that being said, your girl's on a budget, and although she wants to build a library of books, my dream, you gotta like kind of bite the bullet sometimes and be like, yo, this sometimes is just too expensive a hobby. To quell that kind of budget and expense, I do use apps like Libby, and one of those things that I don't think I've ever really taken advantage of is thrifting books. I got Heaven by V.C. Andrews. Now, if you don't know who V.C. Andrews is, she was the epitome of the paperback trash romance drama book of the 80s. If you've ever heard of Flowers in the Attic, which I still need to read, but the premise itself is ancestral. Kids are literally in attics being hidden from family members. It's crazy. And during that time, she was the height of paperback books. Somebody loved V.C. Andrews, and they decided to donate their entire V.C. Andrews library. I don't know if they passed, I don't know if they just got over it or what, but they Marie Kondo'd their house and got rid of all these beautiful V.C. Andrews books. I say beautiful because one thing about an 80s paperback, it brings the drama. You can't find paperbacks like this anymore. You can't, like this one wasn't even the best because they would have like a double layered cover. You know how the 80s smut was, where it was like you saw one thing and then you opened it up and it was another. This was, again, an accent. If an accent is not where it needs to be on an audiobook, it will ruin the book for me. So I did DNF this book as well. It takes place in Louisiana, and the person reading the audiobook, I'm positive has never heard anybody from the South ever actually talk. Her voice was grating. She was trying to use all of these different voices. Heaven, who is the main character, is 14 years old. She was trying to kind of pitch her voice up in order to sound like more like a child. and it just wasn't working. I don't even think I got 10% into the book. I think I got 5%. I was like, nope, this has got to be a physical read. So again, this one, I don't even know if the content in it is any good because the audiobook was that bad. I could not finish it. I'm thinking possibly of trying to read this in November. For some reason, it feels like that'll be a better time and a slower time for me to read a physical copy of a book. Because again, I feel like this is a physical copy situation. And I'm hoping that it's so trashy and crazy that I speed through these books. When I was reading the Goodreads reviews, it was a lot of women growing up in the 80s who said like they were in 7th grade just devouring these books. And I'm very interested with that type of background of like a book. It was a no for me. I just could not get through it. I could not get through the audio. Again, like the narration was just foul. The accents were horrid. And especially knowing that I was going into a book that probably wasn't the best like written book, I was like, I can't also deal with this audio. So we'll come back to this, but I DNF'd this one too. So we have DNF'd 2 books, one for being too literary and one for being not literary enough, but both because the audio accents were trash. I am not doing well at this point, especially since I'm about to go into what should be like my best season to be reading books and be in the spirit and everything. And then the Authenticity Project came up. This is another book I thrifted. I had seen good ratings on Goodreads when I looked it up. The cover intrigued me. The plot of it literally was an artist comes up with what's called the Authenticity Project. He essentially gets a notebook and he says, if you were to be your most authentic, truest self, people usually aren't. What would happen? Tell your deepest truths in this notebook and then put it in another public place to have some other strangers finally see your truth and write down their truth as well, and they'll do the same. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, that sounds interesting. I'm also seeing when I'm flipping through the book that each chapter seems to be from a different point of view of a person. And I'm assuming that they're kind of made up of short stories of different people picking up this notebook and their deepest truth. I was halfway right. This book is that, but like toned down. And in all honesty, if it would have been written in short story form, I think it would have been a much better book. The artist ends up putting this notebook in a cafe where this woman, Monica, works. And it's her cafe. And she's like, she has her own business and she's given Virgo vibes. My life is planned down to a T. There's this whole situation also with another character called Hazard. Apparently he's a drug addict. He's trying to you're meeting him at a point where he's now trying to get clean. And even that part right there should have been a deeper read. And it kind of was flung around, in my opinion, on how it was written. Him getting clean, it seemed like he got clean easily. It took him like basically 4 months in Bali. So he's essentially on vacation getting clean. You don't hear anything about it. You don't hear about any sort of struggle in him getting clean. So it just felt very like, oh, this sounds deep. Let's make him a drug addict. And then you guys don't even bring it up. You guys kind of bring it up like a footnote. That seems strange. I don't want to give too much away in case you do want to read this book. I wouldn't recommend this book. But in case you do want to take a crack at it, I don't want to give too much away. I would say that the secondary characters were the most exciting and we didn't know about their stories. There is a like forced coming out that happens and I don't think it's treated very well, to be honest. There are 2 queer characters in the story. They were exciting and I wanted to know more about them. Didn't. They were also the only people of color in the book. Didn't learn much about them either. I kind of at one point was a little weirded out, again, narration. I have a weird problem sometimes when non-POC people, like white people, when white people like do narrations for people of color. And there have been only a few books where I have heard narration and I'm like, that sounded fine. That sounded good. And then there's some times where they kind of sound like caricatures of people. And I will say that at certain points, especially when the narrator is doing the voice for one of the characters' grandmother, who is, I don't know if they say that she's Chinese or not. I believe they do. And she immigrated to Britain. There are moments where they're saying her words while she does speak in broken English. It just kind of sounds a tad bit strange coming from the narrator. So that's the heads up as well. Like the book just kind of ended on a very open note that left you kind of going, well, what was the point of me reading it? It felt low stakes with a plot that it's supposed to be high stakes. Like you're talking about people's deepest truths and being upfront with yourself and everything. That's high stakes material. Yet it was written like it was supposed to be low stakes, cozy romance type of thing. And it's just kind of like, I don't think you understood what your plot was. I gave it 2 stars. And I feel like I finished it just because I had DNF'd the 2 books before and I had a sucky book before even those 2 DNFs. So I felt like, God, at this rate, if I DNF another book, that's 3 books sitting on my bookshelf that I did not read or I'm not reading right now. This one especially, at one point I was like, I don't even want to read it. But I was already over halfway through the book, so I was just kind of reading it to spite the slump. Okay, I have cleaned up this month, and I have cleaned it up with 2 overhyped book talk books. I hate saying that, but these 2 books, this is why they're getting their own video, to be honest, because yes, they're hyped up, but is it worth it? It is. But these 2 books really pulled me out of a slump and made September much better as a reading month. And essentially these 2 books helped me even so that like September wasn't a wash. And that is Babel and Fourth Wing. I know I'm a book talk girly. I'm a book talk girly, and I think I might be in my fantasy era. I know it sounds wild, especially right before like Halloween season to be reading all the spooky stuff. But both of these books, like I was like, where am I doing anything right now? Can I listen to an audiobook? Like, can I listen to something? Can I do something right now? Let's drive somewhere just so I can listen to an audiobook. That is, I was at work listening to audiobook. People were like trying to get a hold of me. That is how much these books were just so good. Starting off with Babel, I read Babel after the Authenticity Project, and I did not think much of this. I wouldn't have even picked either one of these books up, to be honest, because books this thick, I don't really read anymore. Because I have a short attention span, and I want to read more books. I kind of want more stories as opposed to like long stories. Also, I would hate to read a book this length and would have hated it, you know? So with that being said, I would have never picked this up. However, I am part of Target Circle, like membership club or whatever, which if you're not a part of that, you should definitely be a part of that. It's completely free. You get money back and you get coupons on top of the savings. And as a book reader, they already take like 30% off of their books. So to get 30% off and then baby, like I think I got a 20% for each book on top of that. I ended up getting both of these books that are hardcovers for the same price as only one hardcover, which after tax, it was like $32 I spent on both of these books. And this book on its own, as a hardcover, is $27.99. So I basically got 2 for the price of 1. But I wouldn't have picked these up had I not been in Target and seen how much money I would have saved on it and everything. I was like, I'm in a reading slump. Maybe I should read something that everybody is saying is an amazing book. Babel is worth that hype. I was so surprised. It was so good. I mean, the plot, I would have never picked this up based off the plot. It has to do with immigration and racism during the 1800s. Robin Swift, which is his immigrant name in the book, he was immigrating from Canton, was taken in by an English man and ends up taking him from his home, which has had the plague. Basically, the plague had hit Canton and everything because of English ships, and he was taken out of his home and healed, although his mother and family were not saved. And he was taken when he was around 11 or 12 years old, and then raised in an abusive household to essentially be an amazing translator. He learned about root words, he learned Latin, he learned Greek, he learned English, as well as keeping his Cantonese and everything. And he does all of this for his guardian to get him into Oxford. He ends up at Oxford, and Oxford in this storyline is supposed to be like the Mecca. And that's because silver runs essentially everything everywhere, and the silver has magical capabilities, and that magic is spelled into the silver through translation. And the lesser spoken a language is, the more powerful magic that it is. So English is essentially useless. Cantonese or Urdu is amazing. This book handles ideas of immigration, racism, culture, country, working class, classism, sexism, minority complexes, model minority complex, colorism, the nuances within different racism of different cultures. It tackles all of these things without ever it feeling forced into the story in order to talk about it. That's all I could say. I can't go into deeper context about it, but reading this was absolutely amazing. This is a book where I felt like the diversity in each one of its characters, the writing was so good that you could feel the diversity in each one of those characters, which is something that the Authenticity Project lacked to me. You were reading 5 or 6 different point of views throughout that book, and it didn't sound like you were reading a different person's point of view. It just sounded like they said, oh, this is this person now. But the writing didn't change, the tone didn't change, none of that. As opposed to this, where the tone and all of that did change. There were moments and slight accents here and there, but nothing that ever made the characters feel like a caricature of their cultures. Again, I'll rave about this more in another video, but this was 5 stars. Easily 5 stars. And I went from this into the next book, which was a huge surprise for me. Okay, the next book that I finished, well, I'm gonna be honest. I have 1 hour left in the audiobook for Fourth Wing. I already know it's 5 stars because it is already 5. The only way it could get dropped from 5 stars, in all honesty, is if the ending of this book, it's just completely left field. I would have never picked this up. I'm not, when I was a kid, I read a lot of fantasy. I read Aragon and those dragon books, and I read tons of Harry Potter, and I love fantasy. And I grew out of that sometime in high school. So when I heard about Fourth Wing and knew about the Dragon Academy and the Rider College and all these other, I was like, that's not my book. And it even starts off basically telling you this is not a kid's book. It is not a middle grade book. Just because there are dragons in it, please do not think that this book is made for children. And I will say, halfway through the audiobook, if any 8-year-old child was reading that thinking, oh, this is a story about dragons, it's not. There are some hot, spicy scenes in this book, which is wild for me to say, knowing that this book is plot-wise about a girl named Violet who ends up, she lives in a village or a society that has different sectors. And one of those sectors is the writer sector, and they are writers and wielders of magic and dragons. She's forced into it by her mother, who is the commander of the kingdom's whole, like, war section, basically. And essentially, it talks about her experience trying to survive that college, and also, like, day-to-day things that would normally happen to a 20-something-year-old while, you know, going to college. Except, you know, this is kind of like halfway medieval, magical fantasy type world that's also like you're fighting for your life every day. I mean, in all honesty, it doesn't get spicy until you're about 50% into the book. There are like moments of like wanting, but the spice doesn't happen until a good way through. I absolutely have loved reading this book. I'm including it in this wrap up because the majority of it was read during this month and everything. Although I'll be finishing it in September, it will be within like the first day of September. But I absolutely loved it. The second one's coming out and I'm gonna buy the second one. I was just so surprised by how good this was. And again, I have sat down and came up with reasons for me to sit down and listen to an audiobook because of how good this book has been. The narrator, although I'm positive that she was sick at one point in the audiobook, I could hear a couple of sniffles. It was not... she voices every single character differently, and they all sound like completely different people. So kudos to whoever the narrator was. I'm not sure who narrated this audiobook. It was a thick book, but I have not read books like this thick in a while, and I don't think I would have gotten through even the audios of them, because keep in mind the audios were like 22 hours. So even that is pretty long, unless they were really good books. Again, I don't want to go too far into it. This will be a 5-star. I know it already. Again, the only way it could get knocked down to 4 is if the ending is absolute trash. Like, I just can't believe it. It goes completely left. There's absolutely no way that could have happened. That's the only way this could be turned into like a 4-star. Till then, we're marking it as a 5-star. When I put out my video around speaking more in depth about the two of them, I may state, like, if it happens, it happens. You'll know from watching that video. But as of this video, it's definitely 5 stars. So yeah, that was my wrap up for all of August. Yeah, I'm already ready to say September because we're in the Burr months. This is the holidays. But yeah, that was my wrap up for August. It was a rough month, a weird month. I started off with 2 DNFs and then I ended with 2 5-star books. So it's really just the power of reading. Just like insane to me that I started off this month so rough. Now, I will be showing like my TBR for like a quick TBR for this month that we're in now, which is September. I'm hoping that we can keep this going. And I don't want to jinx it. Like, I don't want to just be like, oh, and I read those book talk books, which that were kind of like layups for 5 stars, essentially, it turns out. And then go back into reading my TBR and find other books that basically are trash again. Let's just get into it. I don't want to jinx it too much. I am glad that I'm back to something that is like fun reading. I'm hoping that, you know, of course, the next book that I read is a good one and everything. I'm hoping that the next ones that I'm reading until the end of the year, or at least to November, are really good. Especially considering, like, this is horror thriller time, and it's very hard for me to not like a horror thriller. Let's get into this TBR, and let's hope that they're good for this upcoming month. For the month of September, I wanted to read some books that were kind of creepy going into October, but I also realized that I had some books that I needed to finish before I really got into just reading whatever the hell I wanted to read, especially getting in the spirit. One of those books was The Push. I started this book in July, and I had to physically read it, and unfortunately I have not had the time to sit down and physically read. It's another reason why I've been reading so many audiobooks, is because I just don't have the time most times, like unless it's the weekend, to actually sit down and physically read a book. This book has been amazing for the third that I've basically gotten through. It's a hard book to read. It essentially deals with a lot of postpartum depression, abuse from a mother onto a daughter, generational trauma. And in this book, there's a conversation of whether or not, like, Blythe Connor is the main character, and the question is whether or not her daughter is a sociopath. It's through the point of view of the main character, Blythe, her mother, and her experience with her mother, as well as her grandmother and her experience with her grandmother. There's some body snatching component, I feel like, in this book. I haven't gotten to it yet, and the audiobook is now available on Libby. I tried to check it out, so I'm hoping that I can breeze through the rest of this by being able to, like, listen to it in the first part of September. This is a spookier book, but I need to finish this book, especially considering that this has been a good book to read. So that's one of the first books that I'll finish right after I finish Fourth Wing. The next book that I need to finish is House Party. This book, you may recognize it. Why? Because I designed that cover. This is my first cover on a book. I am so excited and so proud of it. It is a full jacket. I designed and everything, and I am so proud of it. I got to read the manuscript while making the cover, but of course there's been a lot of editing that has happened since that's all come together, and I have been told by the editors that this audiobook has a full cast, so I am super excited to read it. The manuscript was already really great, so now having the physical copy in my hands, I really want to read it all so I can tell people, yes, this is the book that I designed and I really love the book inside of it, or this is what it's about, or whatever. Essentially, it's pretty straightforward. It's a high school house party before graduation. It is from the point of view of all of the kids who are at that party. When I was reading the manuscript, keep in mind that this book is written by 10 other authors. Yes, 10 other authors, which is what made this book such an anomaly, is that every single chapter that has a new point of view is written by another person. Which is why it made it sound so authentic while reading it, that these are different people, because it was written by different people. So yeah, I'm excited. There is a lot in this book, and I just still love looking at it. I can't believe, like, I got this book. So it's like so surreal having it in my hand, and I feel like I have to read this book. I designed it, I need to read it. So House Party is one of the books that I will be reading. We'll see, but I really hope that, you know, with the edits and everything, the manuscript was great, so I hope that the edits that they've made have made it just that much better. So yeah, House Party is my next book on my TBR. The last two books on my TBR are Bullet Train by Kotaro Isaka. If that sounds familiar, it's because this is the novel that the movie, now on Netflix, Bullet Train, is based off of. I love the movie. The movie essentially is a story of different assassinators? Assassinators? Kelsey, yes, I read. Assassins. Assassins on one train. They all have a certain job. And it's kind of like 6 degrees of separation where they're all running into each other on this train. I feel like there's a better way to maybe describe the book's plot, but that's the best I got right now. Watch the movie though. I don't feel like watching the movie is gonna ruin the book or anything like that. The movie is amazing. The graphics in it, the storyline, it's hilarious and a great watch. It was so good that when I found out that it was a book, I was like, I have to read the book. I hope that it's not a letdown. And now there's a lot riding on this book because I just found out that I have not read anything that's been translated that I was like, this is an amazing book. Unless it's Baby Teeth. And I feel like Baby Teeth, I'm making up that Baby Teeth was originally like translated. Oh, I'm so concerned. So, Bullet Train. Bullet Train's next book on it. Let's move forward. Let's move forward. Okay, last of my TBR for September is a creepier book because I was kind of getting myself ready for the October month and the horror and weird stuff that I'm about to read. So I thought this would be kind of light work of that. And that is You. I was at Savers during my Savers hunt. I picked this book up. I didn't mention it. I don't think I mentioned it in my haul because I wanted to mention it here. But I picked up You. It was available. I love the show, although the last season sucked. The end of the last season sucked because it was very, I think every other season of You has kind of been very interesting in how they set it up in a way that you don't necessarily hate Joe for some weird reason because you're in his head and he's making sense of the things that he's doing, even though those things are crazy. And it also dehumanized him so much that you had no real connection to him whatsoever. Like he didn't care for himself, so you didn't care for him either. All that out the way, I wanted to read the book. I've been wanting to read the book. I'm hoping that it lives up to the expectations that I have for it. I'm hoping that it's kind of an easier, fun read for a thriller, you know? Especially considering I've seen the series. And I thought that especially that first season was so good. More times than not, the book is better than the movie or the series. And I'm hoping that rings true for both books that I have for the end of the month. So that's it. That is my wrap up for the month of August, as well as a peek into my TBR going into September. I'm excited. I'm excited to move forward and hopefully finally be out of this reading slump, especially for the holiday season. And expect some more reviews coming up. Let me know down below what you thought of the books that I reviewed, if any of the books that I gave bad reviews or DNF'd you actually loved, and if you did, maybe tell me why you loved them. Maybe I need to look at it from a different point of view. Yeah, I'm excited for September, and hopefully I have some better reviews to give in this next coming month. We'll see. Bye, y'all.